I said,
like and subscribe, or someone might get teabagged.
come on, do it now!
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on assuming the chairmanship. For those who have the time or the inclination to actually read up on this issue, Mr. Huffman, you might want to look at the United States Capitol Police webpage, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But I think the one that is probably best suited to talk about this issue is Ms. Congresswoman Boebert, so I yield to her.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. So I just wanted to clarify, we had mentioned, it was mentioned on the other side of the aisle, that not everyone who brings a firearm into the Capitol has had training. Well, in order to legally get a firearm into the Capitol, a member of Congress would have had to go through the Washington, D.C. concealed carry weapons training course to bring that in legally, which I've done, which many colleagues have done. And I invite you all to come and take the class. You don't have to get the permit. You don't have to shoot a gun, but take the class. See what the laws are here in Washington, D.C. See the statistics. See how reasonable and safe it is to carry a firearm, to possess one. And you know, there's so many things that are being mentioned on the other side of the aisle. January 6th keeps being brought up. First of all, Republicans didn't incite that. I mean, it's horrible rhetoric for you to keep this up. You know, I'm probably one of the few Republicans that wanted to continue with the January 6th committee because I want the truth out to the American people. I'm tired of you guys running and lying about this and continuously creating this false narrative for the American people. But on January 6th, I was following House rules. There's 3 places where members of Congress cannot carry a firearm. One of them is the House floors. And I was abiding by those rules. And when I heard those doors shaking, I didn't know what was on the other side. And it was the first time in many, many years that I have been unprotected, that I was disarmed, not unarmed, disarmed, because I was not allowed to possess my firearm. Capitol police officers didn't have enough help. Thank God there were members who had their firearms anyway in the House chambers and were helping Capitol Police. And Capitol Police were grateful for their assistance because they were outnumbered significantly. A few months after that, there was a staffer that accidentally brought in a firearm in his bag, ran it through security, and it was minutes, more than 10 minutes, before anyone tracked that staffer down. What if this was somebody with an agenda, with a motive? And then you want us defenseless and not able to protect ourselves? And we don't walk around with Capitol Police officers. Not all of us hire personal security. Most of us like to take that personal responsibility and be our own security when we can. I don't believe that the security of any member here is compromised by having another member of Congress, a highly vetted individual, be able to carry a firearm according to their Second Amendment rights or constitutional rights and defend themselves. But I do want to once again just extend my heartfelt offer to all of you to come and attend a class with me. I host these often so members can obtain their concealed carry weapons permits here in Washington, D.C. Just come and learn on the subject. Hear what our laws are, hear the process of it, and how reasonable it actually is. It's not this big, scary object that's just going to fire on its own. There are safety measures imposed on every firearm, whether there's a safety or not. There are still ways to carry firearms that they're not going to discharge. That's just not something they do. It's an inanimate object. So I appreciate the debate. I look forward to talking more about energy and water and public lands and keeping wolves out of Colorado in the future. But thank you for bringing this up. We can have a little bit of fun in the Natural Resources Committee, and I look forward to defeating this amendment, Mr. Huffman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Mr. Bentz, do you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate the fact that the issues raised by the amendment are addressed in the United States Capitol Police webpage, and so the initial remarks by the chair were correct. This is duplicative and should be voted down. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield out whatever time I have left to you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman recognized.
I'd like to yield to Ms. Canlagadove. No, you go first.
Thank you. I had one other question regarding liability, because while some folks may be trained in how to use a firearm and may use it properly, it is a fact that firearms can be accidentally discharged. It does happen. And so I have a liability question as it relates to members of the public and witnesses and staff who show up to this office, into this committee room, and probably are not thinking that they have to wear Kevlar now. What are the liability concerns, and what are the responses to that if a firearm is accidentally discharged?
I would say that the responsibility is the same as it is in every other committee in the House, as no other committee has this rule in the House. We will follow House rules. The gentlelady yield back.
Yes.
I'll just reclaim my time. I'll just note for the record that during the course of today's meeting, I've seen members come and go out of the room as we do and leave coats, leave handbags, et cetera. So I would just reiterate that if there are going to be members who, whether the House rules allow it or not, are going to be bringing firearms into this room, that everybody reacquaint themselves with those safe practices to ensure that firearms are not left unattended in a crowded room in this space. And I yield back.
I agree with the gentleman. Will you yield for a moment?
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Gosar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
So first of all, a couple misnomers. The gun doesn't discharge by itself. Unlike Alex Baldwin, he did have his finger on the trigger. Number two is, I always thought you guys were the opposition. The enemy was always the Senate. And I think that's what we have to get back down, is to looking at legislation that helps the people. I think this conversation has gone far too long. I think we need to get back to business. Thank you. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to take advantage of just a couple of minutes. I spent a decade of my life training firearms for law enforcement, military around the world. I'm a concealed carry permit, and I would just like to say there's probably nothing about this conversation that I like on both sides. And Mr. Huffman, I associate myself with Mr. Lamborn. That's not a question I feel is appropriate to ask, and would never ask that. Maybe under oath I would answer that, but otherwise I'm not going to answer that. Likewise, to my colleagues who flout or fundraise or tout that they have firearms or that they use firearms or carry firearms, I'm equally as disturbed and uncomfortable, and feel like our personal safety is incredibly important, but it's a matter between us and the Capitol Police and our local police and our staff, and trust everybody to take adequate precautions in those. We all live in a situation that is precarious. I'm often amazed that some local officials have an escort of police officers. As a member of 435, I have realized just how disposable I am. And we have actually very little security and protection. And I can understand that bothers my colleagues, and to the extent that they take steps to protect themselves, I support that. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield. I yield back my time to Mr.
And one
Gosar.
last comment. The gentleman that actually stopped the carnage in Tucson was a private citizen with a gun, not a police officer.
The gentleman yield back. Mr. Gosar, you yield back. Gentleman yields back. There's Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if this point is duplicative, but as our chair, you have authority over this committee. You are responsible for the conduct of this committee. You're responsible for the safety of this committee as it pertains to what we enshrine in our rules. And when I heard earlier some individuals asking if you believed or if the chair believes whether members of Congress should be permitted to bring a firearm into this committee, I heard an answer that was essentially, this is duplicative, the House rules are what they are. But members have very different interpretations of these rules. They challenge these rules. And I think it's very, very important as our chair to understand what your specific interpretation of this is. Does the chair believe that members of Congress should be able to bring firearms into the Natural Resources Committee or not?
The chair believes that members of the Natural Resources Committee should follow the House rules and the guidance by
Yes,
the Capitol
and
Police.
the House rules, members have different interpretations of what those rules are. I need to know, for a sense of my own personal safety, what your interpretation of the House rules are as it pertains to this
I
issue.
believe that would be a question you should take up with the House Administration Committee, and they do have a Members' Day, as all committees do.
So am I? I see. So, so we are seeing that that the chair, who is responsible for enforcement of these rules, does not have a specific interpretation of whether firearms should or not be permitted into the committee, or has the committee not consulted House admin on the House administration's interpretation on these rules?
The chair's position is that we will follow the rules of the House.
Okay. I'll have one follow-up question. Has this committee been in communication with the House Administrative Committee about what the conclusion of these rules are?
The committee has not been in consultation with the House administration because this is an amendment that's not necessary. This will be the only committee in Congress that has this amendment. The only time this has ever been in the rules was when it was put in this committee in the last Congress.
So just in summary, the decision as to whether or not the chair believes that firearms should be permitted in this committee is determined by House admin. But the committee has not been in touch with House admin as to whether this should or should not be allowed. And so therefore, we're just going to leave this ambiguous?
I believe it's up to every member of the House to follow the House rules. And I'm sure you can visit with House admin staff at any time.
Will the gentlelady yield for a moment?
One moment. I do want to reiterate the point of liability. I think that if we're in this point of having to just all take our safety into our own hands, then does the chair believe that members of Congress should also be pursuing legal avenues in order to protect ourselves as well?
The chair believes that's an issue to take up with the House admin, and the chair also believes that we should be focusing on the issues that this committee is chartered to focus on.
I agree. Thank you very much. I yield.
Now will the gentlelady
Gentlelady
yield?
just yield a little bit of
Yes.
time before.
Yes.
By show of hands, we just had members of this committee indicate that they do plan to bring guns into this committee room.
No, said, you asked if we would want to.
I
Nobody
also
said
then
planned.
asked who feels
Committee
so
will-
threatened in their safety that they would need to bring guns into this committee room.
That's not saying that even plans to.
Inference that can't be made.
Okay, so the indication was in the affirmative when that question was asked. So, Mr. Chairman, to
Many
simply
members
say,
were not
to
taking
simply
part
say,
in the farce.
to
Okay,
simply
so
say it's up to
voting
every
president.
member to interpret
The
the
member
rules.
reclaims his time.
When you
The
have
committee will be in
reason, when you
order.
have reason to believe committee members right here intend to bring weapons into this committee room, and Mr. Chairman, we're entitled to your interpretation of the House rules. You need to tell them that that's either okay or not for the safety and security of this committee.
Mr.
And I
Chairman?
yield back to the gentlelady.
I would also just make a request that if this, if the amendment by Mr. Huffman fails, perhaps it would be for the purpose of transparency that at the start of every
Gentlelady's
committee,
time has expired.
we ask who is carrying a firearm.
Any other member
Chairman?
wish to,
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. McClintock, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I just wonder if the gentleman from California or the gentlelady from New York has reason to believe that there is a homicidal maniac amongst us. If they do, they probably would have brought a gun into this room, whether or not there is a law. And I would challenge them right now to present their name the names and present the evidence before such a catastrophe confronts us.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe it's a
Courtesy, by the way, you didn't give me, but go ahead.
It's a mischaracterization. While I am not here to impugn the character of any individual member of this committee. I do believe that the performance
Of course you are.
demonstrated has
Because
shown
Who do you not trust to bring a firearm into a committee room or anywhere else
I
in
believe
public?
that from what I've witnessed, the competence of some members may be something that I would be willing
Well,
to question.
I think you should give
Thank
us
you.
names before the sun goes down, because we're all in great danger if you're correct. But if you're going to name names, I'd like you to present the evidence as well. And if not, then we should draw our own conclusions.
Will the gentleman yield just a bit?
Sure.
First of all, I don't think any member of this committee should have a weapon in this committee room. I believe that's the only reasonable interpretation of the House rules, but what we have heard today, I think reaffirms the concern that that's not how everybody sees it. Some members either aren't interpreting the rules right or think they don't apply to them, and
If the
that is
gentleman
cause
doesn't
for
wish to
concern.
carry a firearm,
And
I
would
invite
just-
him not to carry a firearm.
I would just say in addition that this notion that we're all responsible, vetted individuals, there's nothing to worry about, is pretty cold comfort when we have members of this institution who, it turns out, weren't so well vetted. We don't really know a lot about each other. And we're finding new and interesting things about some of our colleagues every single day. So, thorough vetting is cold comfort, sir, and I'll yield back.
I would simply, again, invite the gentleman, if he has an accusation to make, then to make it. Otherwise, I think we're all free to judge the seriousness of his position.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment?